Ashcombe Manor stood above the rolling hills like a monument to wealth, its honey-colored stone glowing beneath the pale autumn sun. Ivy climbed ancient walls, polished windows reflected endless gardens, and servants moved with disciplined precision through corridors lined with portraits of proud ancestors. Every detail suggested prosperity, yet the grand estate carried a silence heavier than winter fog. Laughter had vanished years earlier, replaced by measured footsteps, whispered conversations, and the quiet weight of grief no one dared disturb. Duke Alistair Ashcombe began every morning the same way. Before reviewing estate accounts or meeting tenants, he paused before the portrait of his late wife. She smiled forever from the painted canvas, untouched by time, while he carried every passing season across his face. For years had slipped away since illness claimed her, but the wound remained raw beneath carefully controlled composure. He convinced himself that discipline protected his children better than affection, though each lonely evening quietly proved him wrong. 10-year-old Oliver watched his father from distant hallways with guarded admiration. Once energetic and endlessly curious, he now measured every word before speaking, fearful of adding another burden to the Duke's shoulders. Hidden inside his writing desk rested dozens of sketches of horses, gardens, and imagined family picnics he wished his father would see. 7-year-old Clara remembered little about her mother beyond the scent of lavender and the gentle lullabies she sometimes heard within dreams. Each night she hugged an old embroidered apron tucked beneath her pillow, believing it still carried traces of the love she desperately missed. Their governess, Mrs. Agnes Blackwood, appeared the picture of refinement before guests. Her voice dripped with polished manners, and her posture remained flawless through every lesson. Behind closed nursery doors, however, kindness disappeared. Mistakes earned cold lectures. Tears invited punishment. Curiosity became disobedience. She insisted strictness forged noble character, yet fear slowly replaced childhood within the young siblings. Neither child dared complain because she always reminded them their father valued order above complaints. The servants recognized the truth but rarely challenged it. Employment at Ashcombe Manor promised security few could afford to lose. Even the cheerful head cook, whose laughter once drifted through the kitchens each morning, struggled beneath the growing sadness surrounding the household. When he unexpectedly collapsed beside the great oven one misty dawn and never rose again, the estate mourned quietly before practical concerns replaced sorrow. Meals still needed preparing. Guests still arrived. Another cook had to be found without delay. Far beyond the manor gates, 24-year-old Elena Hartwell walked dusty village roads carrying a worn leather satchel containing little besides 2 dresses, a loaf of homemade bread, and a carefully folded letter of recommendation. She kissed her grandmother goodbye with a reassuring smile that disguised deeper worries. Their tiny cottage leaked during rainstorms, medicine grew more expensive every month, and unpaid debts threatened the little they owned. Honest work meant survival. Pride had long ago surrendered to necessity, yet compassion remained untouched by hardship. When Elena reached Ashcombe Manor, towering doors and elegant marble floors seemed almost unreal beside memories of her modest village life. Several applicants boasted years of experience serving noble families, while Elena quietly waited without interruption or complaint. During her interview she answered every question simply, admitting what she knew and refusing to exaggerate her abilities. She accepted the smallest wage offered, explaining that steady employment mattered more than generous pay. The housekeeper noticed sincerity where others displayed ambition and offered her the vacant kitchen position before sunset. Life below stairs unfolded at relentless speed. Copper pots gleamed above roaring fires while baskets overflowed with vegetables, herbs, and fresh bread. Elena learned routines quickly, greeting every servant with warmth regardless of rank. During supper preparations she noticed 2 untouched children's trays abandoned upon a side table. Curious, she carried them upstairs herself, only to discover Oliver and Clara sitting silently outside the locked nursery after missing dinner as punishment for speaking during lessons. Without questioning authority, Elena returned to the kitchen, prepared warm pastries shaped like little birds, and delivered them with a conspiratorial smile. The children's guarded expressions softened almost immediately. Clara giggled as flaky crumbs dusted her nose, while Oliver cautiously thanked the stranger who treated them with effortless gentleness instead of stern instruction. Their quiet laughter floated through the corridor just as Duke Alistair rounded the corner after another exhausting meeting. He paused only briefly, surprised by a sound absent from his home for years, before continuing toward his study without a word. Later that night, while carrying fresh linens downstairs, Elena heard muffled sobbing behind a heavy storage room door. Peering through the narrow crack, she froze as Mrs. Blackwood turned the key, leaving young Oliver alone in darkness before walking calmly away. Elena's breath caught in her throat as the storage door clicked shut, leaving only echoing silence where Oliver's muffled sobs lingered. She did not move immediately, listening as footsteps faded down the corridor. The manor felt suddenly colder, as if the walls themselves absorbed fear. When she finally stepped away, her hands trembled, but her expression remained composed. In Ashcombe Manor, curiosity was dangerous, yet indifference felt impossible. She carried the memory of that sound back to the kitchens, where firelight flickered against copper pots like restless spirits. The next morning, Oliver appeared at breakfast with faint marks beneath his eyes. Clara sat rigid beside him, barely touching her food. Mrs. Blackwood watched them with sharp satisfaction, correcting every movement with clipped reminders of discipline. Elena moved quietly through her duties, but her attention never left the children. When Clara's spoon slipped and clattered against porcelain, the governess's gaze hardened. Before punishment could fall, Elena stepped forward offering to retrieve fresh porridge from the kitchens, earning a brief but wary dismissal. That small interruption became her first silent act of defiance. In the days that followed, Elena began noticing patterns others ignored. Meals left unfinished were secretly discarded before hunger could be acknowledged. Laughter between siblings was punished more harshly than silence. The children spoke less each evening, their voices shrinking like fading embers. Elena responded with small gestures that never broke rules but softened edges. She left warm biscuits near the servants' stairs, shaped like birds or stars, never signed, always discovered by curious hands. Soon, Clara began leaving tiny drawings beside empty plates, unsure whether anyone would ever notice. Oliver remained more guarded, watching Elena with careful suspicion. Yet one rainy afternoon, when thunder rattled the estate windows, he found her kneeling in the kitchen kneading dough alone. Without invitation, she handed him a small portion of flour and asked if he knew how to shape bread. He hesitated before copying her movements. Their silence gradually turned into conversation, then cautious laughter as imperfect shapes emerged from their hands. For the first time in years, Oliver forgot to measure his words. That moment lingered longer than the storm. Unseen by them, Duke Alistair occasionally observed fragments of change within his household. He noticed Clara humming while walking corridors once filled with quiet dread. He saw servants exchanging puzzled glances when children lingered near the kitchens instead of retreating upstairs. Yet he dismissed these signs as temporary comfort, believing structure, not sentiment, ensured stability. His grief remained a private companion, convincing him distance was protection rather than absence. Still, something unsettled him each time he heard faint laughter echo through stone halls that had long forgotten joy. Lady Beatrice Hensley arrived without warning, her presence announced by polished carriages and expensive perfume that clung to every corridor she entered. She greeted the Duke with practiced elegance, speaking of alliances and futures shaped by advantage rather than affection. Her eyes, however, quickly assessed everything else within the manor, lingering longer than necessary on the kitchen staff reports. When she observed Oliver and Clara laughing softly with Elena near the courtyard fountain, her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. What she saw was not disorder alone but influence she did not control. That evening, Mrs. Blackwood's authority deepened. Lessons became harsher, punishments swifter, and accusations more frequent. She spoke privately with Lady Beatrice, though no servant heard their full conversation. Only fragments reached the kitchens later, warnings about inappropriate familiarity and the dangers of misplaced trust. Elena felt the shift immediately. Doors closed more quickly when she passed. Conversations ended when she entered rooms. Yet the children still sought her presence, drawn to the only warmth they had recently known. One storm-laden night, Clara's fever broke without warning. Her small body trembled beneath heavy blankets, and even Mrs. Blackwood's stern instructions faltered under panic. The Manor doctor arrived too late to explain the cause clearly, offering only treatments in uncertainty. Elena refused to leave the child's side. She cooled burning skin with damp cloths, whispered stories from her village, and stayed awake long after others had surrendered to exhaustion. Oliver sat nearby, silent but unwilling to leave, watching Elena as though she were the only stable point in a collapsing world. Duke Alistair entered at dawn and found Elena asleep in a chair beside Clara, still holding the child's hand. For a moment he did not move, struck by an unfamiliar image of care replacing duty. He quietly removed his coat and placed it over Elena's shoulders before leaving without waking her. That gesture, unnoticed by others, unsettled him more than any political negotiation ever had. Outside the nursery, Lady Beatrice watched from the corridor shadow, her expression unreadable but calculating. By morning, Clara's fever had broken, and whispers spread through the servants' quarters about the kitchen maid's devotion. Gratitude began replacing skepticism among staff, but Mrs. Blackwood's displeasure sharpened into something more dangerous. She accused Elena of overstepping boundaries, of confusing affection with responsibility. The children, now stronger, defended her openly, surprising even themselves. Oliver declared she had saved his sister. Clara insisted she would not return to lessons without her presence nearby. Their words, innocent yet powerful, marked a turning point within the Manor's fragile balance. That same afternoon, Elena discovered the nursery door left ajar and heard voices she was never meant to overhear. Lady Beatrice and Mrs. Blackwood spoke in low, precise tones about removing interference before it grew beyond control. Elena stepped back into the corridor, heart tightening as she realized kindness had quietly become a threat to someone within Ashcombe Manor, and unseen consequences were already beginning to gather like distant thunder behind its ancient walls that now waited for silence to break again soon. Lady Beatrice's influence spread through Ashcombe Manor like a slow poison disguised as perfume. She did not raise her voice, nor did she need to. Her words were carefully placed, each one designed to bend perception rather than force it. Within days, servants began repeating her concerns as if they were their own thoughts. Mrs. Blackwood, already emboldened by authority, found in her a powerful ally. Together they shaped a quiet narrative. The kitchen maid was becoming too familiar with the children, too present, too disruptive to order. Elena sensed the change before it was spoken aloud. Doors closed more firmly when she approached, conversations dissolved into silence, and even the warmth of the kitchen fires felt watched. Still, she continued her work without complaint. Oliver and Clara remained her anchor within the growing unease. They sought her presence more openly now, slipping into the kitchen whenever Mrs. Blackwood's attention wavered. Elena taught them simple recipes, allowing flour-dusted laughter to exist briefly before duty reclaimed them. Yet beneath every moment of joy, she felt unseen tension tightening like a drawn wire. The accusation came without warning. One morning, the estate's silver service vanished from its locked cabinet. Panic spread through the household, quickly shaped into suspicion. Servants were summoned, questioned, and dismissed from duties. Mrs. Blackwood stood beside Lady Beatrice when Elena was finally called forward, her expression already decided. The search of Elena's modest quarters was swift and invasive. At first nothing was found, until a small cloth pouch emerged from beneath her bedding. Inside lay coins, carefully counted, far beyond the kitchen maid's expected savings. Whispers erupted instantly. Elena did not protest. She simply stood still, hands folded, as though waiting for a truth no one intended to hear. When asked to explain, she spoke only of wages and frugality, offering no defense beyond calm honesty. Oliver tried to step forward but was restrained by a firm glance from Mrs. Blackwood. Clara cried openly, confused by the sudden coldness surrounding someone she trusted. Lady Beatrice observed everything with composed satisfaction, as if the outcome had already been written. Duke Alistair was summoned from his study. He arrived expecting disorder, not betrayal. The sight of Elena standing accused unsettled him more than he expected. He searched her face for denial, justification, anything that might break the quiet acceptance she wore like armor. Instead, he found silence. Mrs. Blackwood presented the evidence with precise certainty, while Lady Beatrice added carefully phrased doubts about influence and impropriety. The Duke listened without interruption, his judgment weighed between reputation and the unsettling memory of his daughter's recovered laughter. That memory should have been enough. Yet the pressure of status, trust in established authority, and the visible evidence in front of him pulled him in another direction. When he finally spoke, his voice carried finality rather than certainty. Elena was to be dismissed immediately, her service ended without public scandal. No further discussion followed. The words fell into the room like stone into water, rippling through every silent witness. Elena bowed her head once, acknowledging the decision without resistance, and left the hall before anyone could see the tremor in her hands. The manor changed again after her departure. The kitchens lost their quiet warmth. Meals returned to strict efficiency. Oliver stopped speaking at dinner, and Clara refused to finish her food. Even servants who had once doubted Elena felt an absence they could not define. Mrs. Blackwood restored rigid order, yet the control felt hollow. Lady Beatrice expected relief, but instead encountered lingering unease in the Duke's expression whenever laughter echoed faintly from distant rooms where it no longer belonged. That evening, Elena packed her few belongings in silence. She did not cry. Instead, she folded each item with careful precision, as though preserving fragments of something fragile but unbroken. Before leaving, she returned to the kitchen one last time. There she baked a simple cake using stored ingredients, shaping it with steady hands despite exhaustion. She left it covered on the table, along with small handwritten notes addressed to Oliver and Clara, words of gratitude rather than farewell. Then she walked out before dawn, unseen by the manor that had once briefly felt like belonging. When morning arrived, Oliver discovered the cake first. He did not touch it immediately. Clara read her note aloud, her voice breaking halfway through. The words offered comfort without expectation, warmth without possession. Neither child ate breakfast that day. Instead, they sat together in the empty kitchen, surrounded by silence that felt heavier than any punishment. Mrs. Blackwood forbade discussion of the dismissed maid, but enforcement could not erase memory already anchored in their hearts. Days passed. The Duke attempted to restore normalcy, but something within the household remained fractured. Lady Beatrice increased her visits, interpreting Elena's absence as opportunity. She spoke more openly of future arrangements, though the Duke responded with growing detachment. He found himself remembering small details he had previously ignored: Clara's laughter during rainstorms, Oliver's hesitant confidence near the kitchens, and the unexpected gentleness that had briefly filled corridors long defined by silence. One evening, while reviewing estate accounts alone, the Duke overheard servants speaking quietly near the staircase. They discussed Elena not with suspicion but regret. One mentioned how she had given part of her own meals to stable boys. Another recalled seeing her comforting Clara during illness without seeking recognition. The accounts contradicted everything he had accepted during the accusation. For the first time, doubt entered not as hesitation, but as weight that could not be ignored. At the same moment, far beyond the manor gates, Elena arrived at a small village cottage where her grandmother waited. The journey had been long and silent. Inside, she resumed tending to simple tasks, baking bread, helping children from neighboring homes, offering warmth where she could. Yet her thoughts often returned to Ashcombe Manor, not in anger, but in unresolved sorrow. She had not expected gratitude, only understanding. Instead, she had left behind children who still believed in her presence. That night, as rain pressed softly against the cottage windows, Elena noticed a distant carriage light moving along the road toward the village. It slowed near the edge of the fields but did not stop. She paused, watching through the dim glass, unaware that the life she had left behind was already moving closer again, carrying with it consequences, truth, and the beginning of a decision that would either fracture everything further or finally reveal what had been hidden within Ashcombe Manor all along. The Ashcombe Manor birthday celebration began beneath a sky too bright to match the mood within its walls. Carriages lined the gravel drive, their polished surfaces reflecting banners, lanterns, and the practiced smiles of nobility arriving with expectations rather than affection. Inside, chandeliers scattered golden light across marble floors, yet every shimmer felt fragile, as if the manor itself hesitated to celebrate. Duke Alistair moved through preparations with controlled politeness, though his attention drifted repeatedly toward empty spaces where laughter once belonged. Oliver and Clara stood quietly at the edge of the grand hall, dressed in carefully tailored attire that felt heavier than silk. Neither child spoke much. Clara clutched a small ribbon tied around her wrist, a habit formed during Elena's presence. Oliver's eyes remained fixed on the long dining table, where gifts wrapped in expensive paper waited like promises he could no longer trust. Mrs. Blackwood supervised their posture with mechanical precision, while Lady Beatrice floated through conversations, her charm sharpened by anticipation of future recognition. As guests gathered, conversation swelled about estates, alliances, and marriages yet to be arranged. The Duke listened without engagement, his thoughts fragmented by memories he could not place neatly aside. He noticed how Clara did not smile at compliments, how Oliver no longer reacted to praise. Something in their stillness unsettled him more than any political negotiation ever had. Yet he told himself the evening's purpose was stability, not sentiment, and proceeded with obligations as required by status and expectation. Dinner unfolded with elaborate courses, none truly noticed by the children. Servants moved efficiently, yet even their footsteps seemed quieter than usual. Lady Beatrice positioned herself near the Duke with deliberate ease, speaking softly of shared futures and social advantage. Mrs. Blackwood maintained her authoritative presence near the children, ensuring no deviation from decorum. Still, beneath this structure of order, something subtle resisted control. Oliver exchanged a brief glance with Clara, one that carried silent agreement neither adult observed. When the time came for gifts, the ballroom brightened with renewed attention. Boxes were opened, jewels displayed, and compliments exchanged in carefully measured tones. The Duke encouraged polite appreciation from his children, but they responded with restrained acknowledgement rather than excitement. Clara touched a jeweled doll without interest. Oliver accepted a small riding crop but did not examine it. The emptiness of their reactions began to spread through the room like a quiet acknowledgement that something essential was missing. At last, attention turned toward the ceremonial birthday wish. Music softened, and conversation gradually faded. The Duke stepped forward slightly, prepared for tradition to conclude the evening with predictable innocence. Instead, Oliver moved first. He took Clara's hand firmly, surprising even her, and stepped into the center of the hall. Every gaze followed them. The silence that formed was not commanded but instinctive, as though the room itself recognized a shift approaching. Clara's voice trembled at first, then steadied with unexpected clarity. She looked directly at her father as she spoke, bypassing fear entirely. Oliver continued when she paused, his tone low but unmistakably firm. Together, they rejected the gifts, the expectations, and the performance surrounding them. Then Oliver spoke the words that altered everything. They did not ask for wealth, nor privilege, nor comfort. Instead, they asked for Elena Hartwell to return. The name struck the hall like a disturbance no one had prepared for. Murmurs rose immediately among guests. Lady Beatrice's expression tightened for the first time that evening. Mrs. Blackwood attempted to intervene, but the Duke raised a hand, silencing her without looking away from his children. For a moment, he saw not disobedience, but honesty. The children were not performing rebellion, they were expressing absence. Something real had been removed from their lives, and nothing present could replace it. Before he could respond, the steward entered urgently, breaking protocol. His announcement halted all remaining conversation. The missing silver service had been discovered hidden within Mrs. Blackwood's private storage chest. Evidence of manipulation, long suspected but never confirmed, now stood undeniable. Accusations collapsed instantly into exposure. The governess's composure fractured as servants confirmed details. Lady Beatrice attempted to distance herself, but correspondence linking her influence to the accusation surfaced simultaneously, revealing calculated interference. Shock replaced ceremony. guests began withdrawing from the hall, unwilling to remain within unfolding scandal. Mrs. Blackwood was escorted away without resistance, her authority dissolving in real time. Lady Beatrice remained frozen for several seconds before retreating into silence, her earlier confidence replaced by controlled retreat. The Duke did not stop her. His attention remained fixed on the empty space where Elena had once stood, and the children still stood waiting for an answer that mattered more than reputation. When the hall finally emptied, only echoes remained. Oliver and Clara stayed where they were, uncertain whether they had been heard. The Duke approached them slowly, no longer as ruler of an estate but as a father confronting distance he had allowed to grow unchecked. He knelt slightly, absorbing the weight of their request. For the first time in years, he did not calculate consequence. Instead, he acknowledged absence. Elena had not been merely staff. She had become presence. Without speaking further, he turned and left the hall. Preparations for departure began immediately, though no announcement was made. Outside, night had already settled across the estate. The Duke mounted his horse alone, refusing attendance. Behind him, Ashcombe Manor remained lit with unresolved tension and scattered guests still whispering about the evening's collapse. Ahead lay uncertainty shaped only by a name his children had spoken with certainty. As the manor gates closed behind him, distant village lights appeared along the horizon, faint and uneven. Somewhere beyond those lights, Elena Hartwell lived unaware of the storm now moving toward her, carrying truth, regret, and consequences that had already begun to reshape everything she thought she had left behind forever. Rain softened the roads leading away from Ashcombe Manor as Duke Alistair rode through the night, guided only by distant village lanterns and the weight of his children's words. Each hoofbeat felt like an admission he had delayed too long. The grandeur of his title meant nothing beneath the pressing realization that he had misread the quiet changes within his own home. For the first time in years, he did not think as a duke issuing judgment, but as a father searching for something fragile he had nearly allowed to disappear entirely. The village appeared at dawn, modest and weathered, its cottages clustered like small islands against fields of damp earth. Smoke rose gently from chimneys, carrying the scent of fresh bread and early work. The Duke dismounted near a narrow path where children's laughter echoed faintly, unfamiliar yet steady. He followed it toward a humble cottage at the edge of the settlement, its wooden frame softened by vines and time. Something within him tightened as he recognized warmth where he had expected hardship alone. Inside, Elena Hartwell moved through the small kitchen with practiced care, kneading dough while speaking softly to several village children gathered around her table. Her sleeves were rolled, flour dusting her hands and hair, yet her expression carried a calmness that seemed untouched by the chaos of the outside world. Beside her, her elderly grandmother rested near the hearth, watching with quiet pride. The scene was ordinary, yet it held a completeness the Duke suddenly realized he had never provided within his own walls. He hesitated at the doorway, uncertain how to enter a world that no longer belonged to his authority. When Elena finally noticed him, her movements paused, not in fear but in recognition. The children turned curiously, sensing unfamiliar presence but not alarm. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence between them carried months of distance, misunderstanding, and decisions made too quickly under pressure that no longer felt justified. Elena stepped forward first, wiping her hands on her apron. Her voice remained steady, though softer than before. The Duke attempted to speak but found no immediate words capable of undoing what had already fractured. Instead, he looked at her directly, acknowledging not her position but her absence within his household. He admitted, without ornament or excuse, that he had been wrong. The simplicity of the confession surprised even him. Elena did not respond immediately. She studied him not as a nobleman, but as a man who had finally arrived without certainty or authority to protect him. Around them, village life continued quietly, unaffected by the weight of their history. The children inside the cottage resumed their small tasks, unaware that something significant was unfolding at the threshold. When Elena finally spoke, her words were measured. She did not ask for apology, only truth. He answered without hesitation. The Duke explained what had occurred at the manor after her departure. He described his children's wish, the revelation of deception, and the collapse of accusations that had once seemed certain. With each sentence, Elena's composure shifted slightly, not into triumph but into understanding. She had never sought vindication. What moved her more was the realization that Oliver and Clara had continued to hold on to her memory despite absence. That truth softened something guarded within her. Before further conversation could deepen, footsteps echoed from the path behind him. Oliver and Clara arrived, having followed their father at dawn in a second carriage. Clara ran forward immediately, breaking the remaining distance with instinctive trust. Oliver paused only briefly before joining her. The moment they saw Elena, hesitation dissolved. Clara reached her first, embracing her tightly as though afraid she might disappear again. Oliver followed, quieter but no less certain, his relief visible in the tension leaving his shoulders. Elena knelt to meet them, her composure finally breaking into visible emotion. The children spoke at once, not with demands this time, but with gratitude and reassurance that they had refused to forget her. The Duke watched silently, realizing that no authority he held had ever achieved what this simple reunion accomplished in seconds. Something irreversible within him shifted, not through persuasion, but through clarity he could no longer deny. When the moment settled, Oliver turned toward his father. His voice was careful but firm. He said they did not want distance anymore. Clara added that they did not want another empty home. The Duke listened, then stepped forward slowly. He did not attempt justification. Instead, he acknowledged the pattern he had allowed to form and the silence he had mistaken for strength. He asked Elena if she would return, not as a servant, but as someone whose presence his children had already chosen. Elena looked at the children first. Their expressions carried no expectation of obedience, only hope shaped by experience rather than fantasy. She then looked at the Duke, seeing not authority but accountability. After a long pause, she nodded once. The acceptance was not dramatic, but steady, as though deciding something that had already been quietly written through actions rather than words. The return journey to Ashcombe Manor felt different. The same roads passed beneath them, yet their weight had changed. Upon arrival, servants gathered cautiously, uncertain of outcome until the children stepped inside holding Elena's hands. No announcement was made. None was needed. Mrs. Blackwood had already been removed permanently following the scandal. Lady Beatrice had departed under quiet disgrace, her ambitions dissolved beyond recovery. What remained was a household searching for balance rather than control. Days turned into weeks as Elena slowly rebuilt rhythms within the manor. Kitchens regained warmth, not through discipline but shared presence. Oliver resumed drawing, now showing his work without fear. Clara no longer slept clutching absence. The Duke observed rather than commanded, learning that participation carried more meaning than oversight. Even servants, once divided by tension, found ease returning through ordinary kindness. One evening, in the restored kitchen filled with soft light and steady laughter, the Duke approached Elena quietly. He did not interrupt her work. Instead, he waited until she noticed him. When she did, he simply placed a small silver ring on the table, shaped modestly, unlike the ornate symbols of nobility. He said nothing at first, allowing silence to hold what words could not yet fully carry. Elena understood without explanation. Around them, the manor no longer felt empty. The children entered moments later, stopping when they saw the exchange. Oliver smiled first, then Clara, as if recognizing something they had already wished into existence long before it became real. Outside, evening settled gently over Ashcombe Manor, no longer as a reminder of loss but as proof that something had finally been restored. And as the first true laughter in years echoed through its halls, the estate's gates remained open, awaiting a future no longer defined by what had been broken, but by what had finally been chosen to heal.